Namaste and welcome to this exciting new episode of Satyology Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth, Logos means a study or science, Satyology means a science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means a study of fake lie imagination or study of imaginary topics or history which is recounted as imaginary. If I were to tell you that whatever you are learning in history is fake, will you ever learn it? Anyone? No, right? So with the Western world called everybody's academic world, I'm saying, called everybody's imaginary history as imaginary and their history as real. And Western academics are at a big fault because they are running the colonial propaganda run by the Abrahamic faiths for themselves. And if you see the 6th century onwards, you can see my last book, Gold, Glory, and God. You'll be surprised what has happened. Today, I have a very, very special guest, a very well-known author and also an ideologue. Ideologue means he teaches according to Sanatan Dharma perspective, and which is a good ideologue. Rest everything has destroyed everything. Sanatan Dharma is a constructive one. So, without delay, let us welcome Sri Nitin Sridhar. Namaste.
Thank you, Aditya ji. Happy to be here again.
So, Nitin ji, before we start, today we are discussing about karma and desire. And before we start off, we all we desire peace in Afghanistan for Bangladeshi Hindus, Afghanistani Hindus, Pakistani Hindus, and also for other communities all over the world. We desire, but reality is something else. So, how do you see that only one side is thinking about benefit of all, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, but other side is not? So, what do you have to say on that before we start on this topic?
I think the important key here is peace cannot exist in vacuum. It never exists in vacuum, and to establish peace implies use of different mechanisms to bring up that peace. A good example, a good framework to understand the mutual relation between war and peace or violence, himsa and ahimsa, is Mahabharata itself. And one episode that is very much relevant in as far as I am concerned is the how the Yudhishthira conducted the Rajasuya Yagya, and before that he defeated Jarasandha. So now for Yudhishthira became the Chakravarti, and later the Mahabharata war also happened. The purpose, of course, was to establish dharma rather than peace per se, but to establish dharma. And peace can flourish only when there is a rule of dharma, only when there is a society that is ruled on the basis of dharma, where dharma flourishes. So, so our attention when we talk about peace and harmony, we have to talk about dharma. Without dharma, there is no peace and there is no harmony. And to establish dharma means we have to fight the adharma. So that is the biggest lesson of Mahabharata. That before Yudhishthira can bring peace, can bring establish dharma, he had to fight the Kauravas. But even before that, he had to first defeat Jarasandha, and that was most crucial because Jarasandha was someone who was very very strong. He was a de facto unannounced, but de facto Chakravarti at his time. He had defeated some 90 plus Kshatriya kings and established his very despotic, very violent and rule everywhere. So there were something like what we see in Afghanistan or Bangladesh or even in portions of India that is happening. So there was such a situation wherever Jarasandha ruled, you can imagine like that. And before peace could be established, his power had to be brought down. His power had to be checked. He had to be defeated. And that is how I see it. But that peace cannot does not exist in vacuum, and it cannot even be brought through vacuum. Like all these certain pessimistic claims or pessimistic narratives that we create, they are all misleading because they do not result in true peace in a true sense. I mean, of course, in the Hindu worldview, the ahimsa, when we speak about ahimsa, paramo dharma, the highest dharma, that is only possible, not possible in a vyavaharika or a transactional everyday world. That is possible only when you escape this cycle of birth and death, when you reach the ultimate goal of moksha, however you define it. But what is needed and what the Sanatana Dharma teaches is it is possible to establish dharma in this cycle and establish a period of relative peace. As long as dharma is standing, there is peace, there is justice, there is harmony. But when the dharma is injured, then uh, all kind of unfavorable and unpleasant things starts happening in the society. Therefore, dharma rakshati rakshita. So protection of dharma is most vital because dharma in turn protects us. So this is how I see it. If we have to relate to current happenings, especially what is happening in Bangladesh is very disturbing. Uh, and what is happening in Kashmir, within India, around India, in Afghanistan, they are all disturbing, and they all are part of. They are all connected. They are not unrelated. We are under the onslaught of Islamic imperialism for the last 1200, 300 years. And now only the form and the shape has changed, but the essence remains the same. Be it in Bangladesh, be it in Afghanistan, be it in Kashmir, be it in the demographic issue, the great huge problem that India as a whole is facing. So it is the one aspect. Of course, India is facing many problems, but one major problem is, of course, from the Abrahamic ideologies, and more important of them is the Islamist ideology. And this problem cannot be ignored. It cannot be whitewashed. It should not be whitewashed because as long as we do not accept that there is a problem, then we won't start even thinking to devise a solution. At least, so as long as we are living in denial, then we are only moving towards our own, uh, uh, what should I say, oblivion, perhaps. So we have to accept that there is a problem, and then we can think about a solution.
See, throughout the world, so nowadays, if you talk about spiritual side to Hindus, they reject it. They say that how is it going to help us right now? And again, the core definitions come in. So one is calm. Kama means any desire for personal sense enjoyment. If you look at all the freedom fighters of India, including Indian Army soldiers and many other people, like India is a country of Deshbhakt, or people who love their country, land. Though it is their own land. You don't find that feeling in USA. You don't find that feeling in any other country which are occupied, especially USA, New Zealand, Canada, Australia. These are four colonies, large colonies, and which are, even today they call it colonies, and they justify that because they were victorious in war, and therefore they own the land now, and they say that it is a history of the world. But my question to most of the Americans and other people is, if I were to occupy your house for 30 years, I kick you out and start calling it my own, does it become mine? No, because it is still a stolen property. Okay, so stolen land always remains stolen. So when we talk to Hindus about calm, and which is anything lustful, or which is for personal sense enjoyment more than anything else, then it creates another kind of narrative is being taught, that it's a property victor's property. So how do you see calm from that point of view, and if you can throw some light there based on the word?
This is an interesting question. Uh, so something I need to reflect upon more. But as I see it, see basically what is calm? Karma, when we speak. there are two senses to that word. One is the sense of desire, something towards which the mind flows, the mind and the senses flows naturally. And the other sense is in the sense of pratiti, the attainment of that, which results in some form of enjoyment. So there is desire for some an object, and there is enjoyment of that. Now, this calm, this desire and the enjoyment, it could be something which is pursued in a adharmic manner, or it could be something which is pursued in dharmic manner. So, in the conventional Hindu worldview, the Hindu model of Purushartha, we place Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, we speak about, and we place Kama in between Dharma and Moksha, and Dharma comes first for this reason that Artha and Kama has to be pursued through the path of Dharma, and only then that will be really fulfilling and meaningful. Otherwise, meaningful and fulfilling, what does it mean here? It means that such kama, such desires which are fulfilled through the path of righteousness, through the path of ethical path, um, they will not only help us enjoy the object of desire, but they also help us to eventually take us to a higher mode of desire, higher mode of enjoyment, and they also take us slowly towards the cause of purification of the mind, such that they take us towards the ultimate goal of moksha. On the other hand, the desires which are pursued and enjoyed in a adharmic manner, they lead to more and more bondage and more suffering. There may be temporary enjoyment, but ultimately it ends in suffering and destruction. A good example is, if I want to make money, then I can work hard, I can do business or whatever it is. I can work hard and earn the money, and I can have a satisfaction along with the enjoyment of that money. I can have an inner satisfaction that I earned it. I have a confidence, inner satisfaction, and a calmness and contentment. But if you are earning that money by stealing from a bank or stealing some idol from a temple or something like that, then that is pure stealing. That always ends bad. No matter how you try, how much you try to avoid the secular law, you may still end up in a jail. But more importantly, you will not have satisfaction, you'll not have contentment, you will not have fulfillment, and there will be, of course, the karmic consequences of such action. So similarly, in the larger national scene, so to speak, um, the Hindus, for Hindus, this land of Bharatavarsha, this Jambudvipa, it is our Punya Bhumi, it is our Pitru Bhumi, it is our Matra Bhumi. The name Bharata comes from Bharata or Bharati, the land of knowledge. That we are inheritors of that. So we have our alliance, our allegiance, our there is not. It is not just a political allegiance that we have towards this government of this land. What Hindus have, the relation that Hindus have with this land, is that of devotee with respect to the Divine Mother. How the Aurobindo, the Vande Mataram is basically a eulogy of the Divine Mother Durga or Chandika, who is manifested as Mahabharati. And but that is a very recent one. But even oldest in the Vedas, for example, you see the Bhumi Sukta, which worships the Bhumi as the mother, right? So this is the kind of relationship that we truly have. The relationship of it that a children shares with the mother, a devotee shares with the deity, and so this is a sacred relationship that transcends all form of mere secular communication, secular conventional modes of relationship. So this is missing, as you say, in an American or Australian or any other things, because it's a colonized land. But even there, I would say that uh, expansion that happened there in the West and in Australia, it came at a very huge cost, huge human cost. It came at the cost of huge injustice, inhuman genocide, so to speak. So all these are collectively have a role. So that is very distinct. There are other kinds of colonization or expansionism. We need not always be in such a asuric or such a adharmic way. It is very much possible. For example, India extended a cultural expansionism, a cultural influence from throughout Southeast Asia, even on China, for example. Uh, the iconography of Hanuman is very much prevalent across China. The Monkey King, the famous Monkey King of China, is a direct uh, knowledge transfer from India. So, we can think about the. So we need to distinguish between, as you rightly said, the Desh Bhakti that is currently in India is completely distinct from what we see in America and other places, because here the connection, it is bhakti. The very term says everything. It is a bhakti. It is not mere allegiance, mere secular allegiance. It is not a mere relationship of convention, but it is a bhakti. And bhakti is a superior form of kama. So bhakti is a special manifestation of kama itself, wherein the desire one has a unending, undying, a one-pointed desire, one-pointed concentration, one-pointed earning towards the devata, towards the deity. And that deity could be anything. It could be our land, it could be this Bharatavarsha, then it becomes Desha Bhakti. It could be Vishnu, then it becomes Vaishnava Bhakti. It could be Shakti, it could be Shakta Bhakti. So, whatever the object of that such a devotion, it is Bhakti, and it is a superior form of Kama. So that is much beyond the notions of desire that we know in a transactional sense. In a everyday sense, the lust and other things that you spoke about, the desire for more and more possessioning of more property, more land, more money. So that is a lower form of desire. That is what is sometimes such form of desire is sometimes counted among the Arishad Vargas, the inner enemies, the inner passions, Kama, Krodha, Moha, Lobha, right? So we see that such kind of desire in other certain political states which have come into existence in the past few centuries. But what we have in India, it is many millennia old. And from a Hindu perspective, it is as old as creation itself. We do not count any historical beginning per se. So, yeah, they are fundamentally different.
So one of the things which comes into the mind, and you and I can discuss for long hours. So the is karma good or desire good, or karma bad or desire bad? What do you think on that?
I think I do not. If we have to translate karma into English, then we have to use words like desire and pravritti. And I do not see in Hindu perspective, desire per se is not bad. So, see, we do not believe in suppression of desire. As we believe in vairagya, which is detachment and dispassion, and that dispassion is rooted in knowledge that the worldly objects are transient. So it is not rooted in suppression. So they, when we realize that the worldly objects are uh, the attachment, more precisely to the worldly objects, go away on its own. So there is no suppression of desire. So towards this end, the desire is not considered as some kind of enemy or some kind of bad thing. But only in the context of certain spiritual practices and the chitta shuddhi, the purification of the mind, the effect of desire, the effect of attachment that has on the mind is considered as one of the internal enemies, the Arishad Varga, which needs to be transcended. So, well, that is so. But at the same time, the Kama, in the larger perspective, is also considered one of the Purusharthas. And as I show in my paper, it has been published in Indic today. Kama as a Purushartha and investigation. That's the title of the paper. Uh, Kama is not only one of the four Purusharthas. There are evidences from the Shastras that we can actually think about all the four Purusharthas as a special manifestation of Kama itself. The difference is that the object of that desire is distinct in all of them. So Kama is also the Parama Purushartha of Moksha. Moksha is also Kama in some sense. So So kama as a whole is not bad mouth in Hindu Dharma. Uh, its role is understood as a purushartha. Its role as an obstacle is understood in the context of Parishad Varga. And different levels of karma, different types of karma is also understood. There is karma, of course, in a everyday sense of even, for example, what is called as pursuit of artha is basically a desire for accumulating more and more worldly objects. Whether you enjoy it or not is secondary. You just accumulate it. Say that I have 100 acres of land, I have 100 Rolls Royce cars or whatever it is. You may not be even driving all of them. You may be driving each of them only once in your lifetime, but still you accumulate things. So that is also one form of pursuit of desire. So a pursuit of artha is one form of pursuit of desire. And Raja Bhoja says that this kind of pursuit of desire is the lowest form of pursuit, because you are not even enjoying what you are possessing, but you are just happy in possessing things, holding things more and more. And then there is other way of pursuit of desire, which is normally called as kama in the conventional model, which is that to pursue something to derive sensual pleasure from. That is, I love someone because it gives me happiness. The feeling of being loved by that person in return gives me happiness. Or I see an ice cream, I purchase it and I eat it because in eating it I feel kind of happy. So this is a kind of pursuit of desire, which is pursuit of kama, which is usually in the conventional model called as kama itself, wherein we pursue objects of the world to attain some form of sensual enjoyment. That is also again a temporary enjoyment. And if we are unable to get it, then we become frustrated. That if someone you love do not love you back, reject you, then you do not feel good about it. You are sad, you feel sad, you feel sorrowful, and you try to get over it, right? And then there is also another kind of pursuit of desire, which is pursuit of dharma. What is the pursuit of dharma actually entail? That I say that I will lead an ethical life. I will lead a life according to the tenets of Shastra, by following what is prescribed, what is prohibited. I will do my swadharma. I will do my duties towards my family, towards the society, and in doing so, I derive a pleasure called satisfaction, and that I am doing living a ethical life. So this pursuit is also a kind of pursuit of desire, where the desire is for the satisfaction and content, and also for the karmic fruits that ensue from it. Then, of course, there is finally the pursuit of moksha, which is a very interesting kind of pursuit, because moksha, by definition, implies that you are not pursuing anything that is worldly. So you are not pursuing worldly objects. So there is vairagya, there is a dispassion from the worldly objects, but still you're pursuing something, and that is mumukshatva. Mumukshatva is a burning desire to attain the ultimate goal of moksha, to attain Brahman, the Ishvara, who is the ultimate goal of life. That can be attained through jnana, it can be attained through bhakti, however you see it. So you call it jnana marga, you call it bhakti marga. In both of them, ultimately you have the goal in attaining that Ishvara or Brahman, however you conceive it, and you are attached to that goal. You pursue that goal, you have desire to understand that goal, and when you attain that goal, you enjoy permanent happiness, ananda. By definition is that sukha or happiness which is without any form of dukkha. The happiness in the worldly object pursuit is, it is temporary and it leads to sorrow. But in case of ananda, that moksha, it is permanent happiness, and they are completely devoid of sorrow. So you see, even moksha then is a pursuit of kama, and moksha is a special form of kama. It is a special manifestation of kama. So this is a very beautiful thing to understand. This completely changes the negative attitude towards desire, and this negative attitude towards desire has caused serious havoc in society across the world. I think, if I am not mistaken, in the Abrahamic religious worldview, desire is kind of sin, right? If I am not mistaken, especially the story of Adam and Eve, the eating of the apple, the first primordial desire. So the desire is kind of sin. We do not have that concept in Hindu worldview. We do not consider desire as some form of evil, some form of demonic. What we consider as problematic is an unrestrained pursuit of desire, reckless pursuit of desire, which leads to sorrow and more bondage. Which is the path of the asuras? Because that desire which is not attached to dharma, that is problematic, because then there is no end to desire. You keep pursuing one after the other without caring for the consequence of your action. That is problem. But desire as such is neutral. So it depends upon how we pursue desire rather than desire itself being something bad. Because what we say, we equate desire with Prajapati. That is, we equate desire as the first manifestation. We equate desire with Ishvara itself. So this being so, the desire is not bad. It is neutral. How we pursue desire then determines whether something, a course of action is good or bad.
So one of the things which you mentioned, Vaishnavite, Shaivite, and Shakta worshippers, if you look at the history of India, this is more like a colonial propaganda to divide Sanatan Dharma. If you look at the relationships also, Durga is the wife of Shivji, Ganesh is Durga's son, and Durga is regarded as a younger sister of Vishnu all over the scriptures. Gopendra Syan Jai Jai Nanda Gopa Kulodbhave. Now, this colonial propaganda is going on, and we easily fall into that. According the Harinam definition in Shastra is very broad. Like even Ganesha's name is considered Harinam because it is connected ultimately to Vishnu somewhere. His father is Shiva, and this goes on. So when we now coming back to the topic is Kama. When you talk about Kama, if we say calm is bad, and I'm being a devil's advocate, is then what happens to all the innovation? Because the Western theory, the need is a necessity for innovation, and they say there was a very famous word which was coined by some Muslim scholars, Hindu rate of growth. And I challenged them, then what is the Islamic rate of growth? All the Islamic countries are poor, and they go to any rich country and they make it poor also. And in India, the biggest poverty is in the areas where Muslims are in majority, and same is in any other country, including Arabian countries like UAE. That's the only shining example they have. But we all know 80% of their population is from India, Hindus. All their companies are run by the British. They have got a racial preference over there. The British are considered the best CEOs. So all the CEOs will be British, but all the CFOs and CEOs will be Indians. The next two layers. So there is a racial thing also over there. So the point which I'm trying to say is, calm is bad, and how do you defute that?
See, I think
Desire is good and calm is bad, which is totally different.
I am not sure what they mean when they say desire is good but calm is bad. But I think, see, there is a deep fundamental misunderstanding of the notion of karma or the notion of desire. See, I'm using when I am using desire throughout this discussion, I am using it to refer to karma itself. So I do not make this somehow that this distinction that karma is bad, desire is good. I do not make it, but rather I would speak about desire or karma in the sense of a lower sense and in a higher sense, or in a more problematic sense and in a more useful sense. So I think that is a better way to look. As you rightly said, without desire, without karma, uh, there is no creative impulse. The Vedas say that the very creation of the universe happened because of the impulse of desire. So there is one sukta I have quoted in my essay. So basically, it says that the creation is caused by the desire or the karma. So when this is so, every innovation, the desire, it's not just a need. Need gives rise to desire basically, but desire or karma is at the heart of all actions, not just innovation, but even our actions. For example, why do we why do we have to do spiritual practice? Because we desire the goal of that spiritual sadhana. That goal may be anything. It could be moksha, it could be attaining the sakshatkara of a deity, realization of a deity, whatever be the goal. So whatever actions we do, there is desire at the heart of it, at the source of it. The desire gives rise to action. So this being the case, if we demonize action if we demonize desire or karma in entirety, and then that is problematic. So what is happening today, I think, is when we speak about karma, we have a very narrow notion of karma. For example, karma is often associated with only sexual desire, and that has a historical reason also. There is a special connection between karma and pursuit of sexual desire. That is okay, but the way we associate it is the problem. That we associate it in a very negative and again, as I said, the karma in the context of arishat varga, the internal passions, has a negative connotation in the sense that it is what binds one to the samsara, the bondage, and takes us more and more into the darkness. But that limited negative context has to be put in the larger context, which is the context of purushartha. We Since we are unable to do this, we are perceiving karma in a very demonized and negative way, and I think that is the root of the problem. The more holistic understanding of karma or desire is basically this, that it is the cause of all actions. It is something which is integral. It is inherent in all of us, and it is the source of all actions, good or bad, and hence it is a purushartha. Knowing this, that karma is a purushartha, we need to pursue it in such a way that it gives us maximum benefit and does not and frees us from uh, all the kinds of obstacles, all the kinds of negative effect. That is, if you pursue any desire in a reckless manner, in an unrestrained manner, then that leads to problem. As I said, the issue is not with the desire. The issue is with how you pursue that desire and what kind of desires you pursue. So not the problem with karma as abstract concept, but the problem with what kind of desire, whether you're impelled by your tamasic guna to pursue certain desire, or whether you're impelled by the rajasic guna, or whether you're impelled by sattvic guna. So we have to fix that. So that is the problematic area is to fixed by pursuing desire in a dharmic way and pursuing dharmika desire and understanding that karma is a purusha. It is a life goal that has to be pursued in a proper manner. So if we do this, then we will find our life more meaningful. We will find that the life is then this is a philosophy which is not a life negating philosophy. We have this misconception that Hindu Dharma is a life negative philosophy, because this misconception has again come from the fact that we misconceive that Vedanta is a life denying philosophy. There are sort of lots of misconceptions playing around here. The Vedanta, the Upanishad knowledge is taught to one who has already developed a dispassion towards the world. That doesn't mean that everybody has developed dispassion towards the world. The second verse of Isha Upanishad, as it says, for those who desire to live in the world for 100 years, they must perform action. There is no other way. So performing action means pursuing desire. So we have to have this holistic perspective of desire, of karma, of pleasure, how to enjoy the pleasure. So without that holistic aspect, what is happening is today we have a very materialistic understanding. There is no refinement of the pursuit of karma. That is the missing key here. we either recklessly pursue it to the extreme, as we see in certain modern. We live only one YOLO culture. You live only once culture, wherein it is completely focused on enjoyment in a very reckless manner. You do drugs, you do this, that, you um, uh, sleep around with anybody you want. Uh, there is no control your life. There is no restrainment in your actions. That is the source of the problem, not the desire per se. You pursue everything in moderation, in a restrained manner, in an ethical manner, then things start working out.
No, there is a, I think the confusion has come from Kama Shastra, Kama Sutra, and that is the main thing, like the which is Kama Shastra is a completely different scripture than Kama Sutra. Kama Sutra was designed for something else, and Kama Shastra is something else. And
No, I mean, actually, Kama Sutra, Vatsyayana is one text among many in the tradition of Kama Shastra. They are actually same because, see, even if you take Kama Sutra, Vatsyayana, the very opening verse, Vatsyayana says that Dharma Artha Kamebhyo Namaha. So he does the salutation to Dharma, Artha, and Kama, all the three Purusharthas. It is a text manual which is more focused on man-woman relationship. It's not just about sexual positions as it is misconceived. Only one chapter out of the many deal with that part. It is about enriching man-woman relationship, and this enrichment of man-woman relationship is a very important aspect of Grihastha Ashrama Dharma, for example. So we need to understand uh, how the karma is conceived. Even the sexual desire has an important role. Rati is one of the pillars of marriage, and vivaha or marriage or the grihastha ashrama dharma is one of the pillars of society. It's the main pillar of society because it's the grihastha or the householder who support the sannyasins, who support the brahmacharis, who support the entire society. He has the duty for Panchamahayagya and everything else. But he will not be the Grihastha, the householder couple, will not be able to do their duties properly if they are not compatible with each other, if they do not have love with each other, if if there is so that is where the Kama Shastra, the Kama Sutras come into play. It's a document of increasing the love and relationship between a man and woman. So the confusion is the authors of Kama Sutra do not have the confusion. The confusion is with we people who have been disconnected from our tradition for the last 1,000 years, but especially in the last 200, 300 years. But with respect to Kama, the disconnect has been for the last 1,500 years, unfortunately. So, but yeah, I would definitely say this that sexual desire is only one aspect of the Kama. So to truly understand karma, then we have to take the some overall perspective, not just the perspective of the Kama Shastra, but also the perspective of the Dharma Shastra and the Itihasa Puranas and other larger traditions.
see, one of the questions which usually is asked is, like, for example, Narada tells to Yudhishthir that there should be balanced life: morning for swadhyaya, day for working, and evening for controlled sense enjoyment, kama. And this is the balance which is being taught here. And this is none other than the highest authority is talking. Narada Muni is talking. When he definitely, most of us can have many views, but he's the main protagonist of all the theories we have, or in terms of teaching and prachar. Obviously, it must have come from Veda, because otherwise Narada Muni will not speak it. So the moment you say, see, and also there is another thing, that we are given free will. So desire is the only thing we possess. We cannot have any other thing other than desire. Like, all of us want to desire to do good to others, because that's the only free will we have. So the when we talk about this important topic of kama versus desire, and dharma, artha, kama, moksha, and the chatur purushartha. So when we talk about it, so where do you think is the confusion amongst the followers of Sanatan Dharma? Because they all of them invariably say calm is bad and desire is also bad. Without desire we cannot exist. Like you cannot have khichdi all day long. People who only get khichdi, they want to have some puri, kachori, or pizza also for some time. So that's the only thing we have. So demonizing that, and there are two marg also, pravritti marg, nivritti marg. You have spoken a little bit reference you've given. So if you look at the Muslim Islamic culture, it's based on uh, pravritti marg. Means keep on increasing. You can have four wives, you can have as much you want, and then gradually it will come out. It doesn't happen. And the same philosophy of Christianism, I don't call it Christianity, I call it Christianism. Christianism is the philosophy is just enjoy. This whole land is made for your enjoyment. Just enjoy as much as you can. But our Shastra says that if you keep that philosophy, the desires will never go down. Will never go down. And the Vedic philosophy says you have to go to Nivritti Marg, slowly decrease your desires and wants. That's why you keep Ekadashi. And unless it's like when you supply fuel to an engine, the fuel actually increases the power of the engine. So if you keep on just fueling it again and again till the age of 90, the desires won't die. Desires will just increase. That's why even a 90-year-old man sometimes marries a woman for money. I mean, woman marries for money, but they marry because the desires never go. Okay. So final word on this, that what the as far as pravritti and nivritti marg goes, how do calm and desire stand?
Yes, as you rightly said, in the Hindu worldview, the Shastric view, it proposes neither a suppression of desire nor a unrestrained, reckless pursuit of desire. What it suggests is basically a restrained and a controlled way of pursuit of desire, such that the pursuit itself leads one to transcend desire. So this is the key, that when you pursue desire in a restrained and controlled manner, in a very conscious manner, then you'll be able to slowly transcend the desire. So that is the path of the vairagya. Vairagya is the only way to transcend desire. You cannot transcend it by suppressing it. You cannot transcend it by recklessly fulfilling it again and again and again, as you say, even 90-year-old people getting married, for example. So, so why there is a misconception is that the misconception is because of misapplication of the Hindu philosophical thought. There is a clear distinction between the teachings of the Nivritti Marga and the teachings of the Pravritti Marga. They're addressed to two different audiences. The teachings of the Nivritti Marga, that is the path of the sannyasa, basically, the path of the renunciation, that teaching is specifically for those who have already attained vairagya or dispassion towards the worldly objects. That teaching cannot be applied to the householders who have attachment towards the object. So misconception is happening that today when we learn Vedanta, for example, there is a lot of people become misguided without realizing, because they think that since Vedanta is the ultimate goal or moksha is the ultimate goal, we can simply jump into the path of moksha. This is the result of new age movements, partly. Mostly this is a result of misconception of Vedanta. Pseudo Vedanta, we can call it, basically. We cannot simply jump into the path of moksha by suppressing our desires. That is not how it works. To attain moksha, first you have to attain the required competencies, which includes viveka, vairagya, etc. That is discrimination between real and unreal, dispassion towards worldly objects, and so on and so forth. To attain that, we have to first perform our duties, the swadharma, the karma anushtana, and practice bhakti. So we have to first pursue purushartha. We have to first pursue the desires that we have in a restrained manner, in a conscious manner, in a manner by the path of dharma, such that we transcend the desire first. So the first stage is to transcend the worldly desire. Then you focus all your attention towards that ultimate goal of moksha. So without the transcending the worldly desire, you cannot directly simply jump to pursuit of moksha by saying that by suppressing your desire or by calling, by demonizing desire as some kind of evil. So that is where the source of misconception is, the that we are misapplying teachings of the renunciation to the teachings of for the life of a household. For us, all of us who have these desires, the desire has to be pursued in a controlled and conscious manner, in a restrained manner. And you to do the doing this means that pursuing purushartha, four purusharthas, locating us, placing us in the framework of four purusharthas, and pursuing our duties, doing our duties, pursuing our desires in a measured manner. So I think this kind of, I hope this clarifies. Kama has to be understood as a purushartha. Without this understanding, everything becomes problematic. You will either end up glorifying kama and recklessly pursuing it, which will also be problematic, or you will end up demonizing kama and completely suppressing it, which will also be problematic. So understanding kama as a purushartha, as in the larger scheme of life, that is the measured way to approach kama, to transcend kama eventually.
Thank you so much, Nitin Sridharji. It's a very little bit depth in structure discussion, and I think people will learn from it and hopefully comment on it. I'm getting a lot of positive comments on that, because karma is demonized in the Western academic circles. I'm talking about only American academic circles. Nowadays, I call the British education system as a slave of American education system. So it is definitely just following the American viewpoints and the French viewpoints. So British conquered American territory, but they surrendered to French philosophies. So it is affecting them also. So thank you for coming on the show and educating all of us and sharing this wonderful news, wonderful information. And for all the viewers who are watching, do check out Nitin Sridhar's book. He's a published author, and Ishopanishad was the last book he released. And I think he has many other publications. Nithin Sridhar. Most of you make a mistake in pronouncing his name, and that's how you cannot find him. So please do that and let me know your feedback. Namaste.
Thank you.